Donald Trump has adopted many contradictory positions since taking office, but he has been unwavering on one point, that Russia played no role in putting him in the Oval Office. Trump dismisses the idea that Russian interference affected the outcome of the 2016 election, calling it a made-up story, ridiculous, and a hoax. He finds the subject so threatening to his legitimacy that, according to The Perfect Weapon, a recent book on cyber-sabotage by David Sanger of The Times, aides say he refuses even to discuss it. In public, Trump has characterized all efforts to investigate the foreign attacks on American democracy during the campaign as a witch hunt. In March, he insisted that the Russians had no impact on our votes whatsoever. Few people, including Trump's opponents, have publicly challenged the widespread belief that no obtainable evidence can prove that Russian interference changed any votes. Democrats, for the most part, have avoided attributing Hillary Clinton's defeat directly to Russian machinations. They have more readily blamed James Comey, the former FBI director, for reversing Clinton's thin lead in the final days of the campaign by reopening a criminal investigation into her mishandling of classified emails. Many have also expressed frustration with Clinton's weak performance as a candidate and with her campaign's tactical letters. Instead of investigating whether Russia tipped the electoral scales on its own, they focused on the possibility that Trump colluded with Russia, and that this, along with other crimes, might be exposed by the probe being conducted by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. The U.S. intelligence community, for its part, is prohibited from investigating domestic political affairs. James Clapper, the former director of National Intelligence, told me, "We try not to spy on Americans. It's not in our charter." He emphasized that although he and other intelligence officials produced and shared with Trump a post-election report confirming an extensive cyber attack by Russia, the assessment did not attempt to gauge how this military attack, had affected American voters. Speaking for himself, however, he told me that it stretches credulity to think that the Russians didn't turn the election. Ordinarily, Congress would aggressively examine an electoral controversy of this magnitude, but the official investigations in the House and the Senate, led by Republicans, have been too stymied by partisanship to address the ultimate question of whether Trump's victory was legitimate. Although the Senate hearings are still on the way, the Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr, a Republican, has already declared, "What we cannot do, however, is calculate the impact that foreign attack and social media had on this election." Even the Clinton campaign has stopped short of attributing its loss to the Russians. Joel Benenson, the campaign's pollster, told me that a global power is fucking with our elections, and that every American should be outraged, whether it changed the outcome or not. But did the meddling alter the outcome? How will we ever know, he said. We probably won't, until some Russians involved in it are actually prosecuted, or some Republican, in a moment of conscience, talks. Politicians may be too timid to explore the subject, but a new book from, of all places, Oxford University Press, promises to be incendiary. Cyberwar: How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President, What We Don't, Can't and Do Know, by Kathleen Hall Jamieson, a professor of communications at the University of Pennsylvania, dares to ask, and even attempts to answer, whether Russian meddling had a decisive impact in 2016. Jamieson offers a forensic analysis of the available evidence and concludes that Russia very likely delivered Trump's victory. The book, which is coming out less than 2 months before the midterm elections, at a moment when polls suggest that some 60% of voters disapprove of Trump, may well reignite the question of Trump's legitimacy. The president's supporters will likely characterize the study as an act of partisan warfare, but in person, Jamieson, who wears her grey hair in a pixie cut and favors silk scarves and matronly tweeds, looks more likely to suspend a troublemaker than to be one. She is 71 and has spent 40 years studying political speeches, ads, and debates. Since 1993, she has directed the Annenberg Public Policy Center at Penn, and in 2003 she co-founded FactCheck.org, a non-partisan watchdog group. She is widely respected by political experts in both parties, though her predominantly male peers have occasionally mocked her scholarly intensity, calling her the drill sergeant. As Stephen Livingston, a professor of political communication at George Washington University, puts it, she is the epitome of a humorless, no-nonsense social scientist, driven by the numbers. She doesn't bullshit. She calls it straight. Indeed, when I met recently with Jamieson in a book-lined conference room at the Annenberg Center in Philadelphia and asked her point-blank if she thought that Trump would be president without the aid of Russians, she didn't equivocate. No, she said, her face unsmiling. Clearly cognizant of the gravity of her statement, she clarified, "If everything else is a constant, no, I do not." Jamieson said that, as an academic, she hoped that the public would challenge her arguments, yet she expressed confidence that unbiased readers will accept her conclusion that it is not just plausible that Russia changed the outcome of the 2016 election, it is likely that it did. An airtight case, she acknowledges, may never be possible. In the introduction to her new book, she writes that any case for influence will likely be similar to that in a civil legal trial, in which the verdict is rendered not with the certainty that E equals MC squared, but rather based on the preponderance of evidence. But she points out we do make most of life's decisions based on less than rock-solid, incontrovertible evidence. In Philadelphia, she noted to me that we convict people on probabilities, rather than absolute certainty, and we've executed people based on inferences from available evidence. She argued that the standard of proof being demanded by people claiming it's impossible to know whether Russia delivered the White House to Trump is substantially higher than the standard of proof we ordinarily use in our lives. Her case is based on a growing body of knowledge about the electronic warfare waged by Russian trolls and hackers, whom she terms discourse saboteurs, and on 5 decades' worth of academic studies about what kind of persuasion can influence voters and under what circumstances. Democracies around the world, she told me, have begun to realize that subverting an election doesn't require tampering with voting machines. Extensive studies of past campaigns, Jameson said, have demonstrated that you can affect people, who then change their decision, and that alters the outcome. She continued, I'm not arguing that Russians pulled the voting levers. I'm arguing that they persuaded enough people to either vote a certain way or not vote at all. The effect of such manipulations could be momentous in an election as close as the 2016 race, in which Clinton got nearly 2.9 million more votes than Trump, and Trump won the Electoral College only because some 80,000 votes went his way in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. In 224 pages of extremely dry prose, with poor appendices of charts and graphs, and 54 pages of footnotes, Jameson makes a strong case that in 2016 Russian masterminds pulled off a technological and political coup. Moreover, she concludes, the American media inadvertently helped them achieve their goals. When Jameson set out to research the 2016 campaign, she has researched every presidential election since 1976. She had no intention of lobbing a grenade. She was spending a peaceful sabbatical as a fellow at the Shorenstein Center at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, exploring a rather narrow topic, the 2016 presidential debates. She'd chosen the subject because, having devoted decades to examining the impact of advertising and other forms of persuasion on voters, she believed that most of the big questions in the field of political campaign communications had been answered. Also, she admitted, I have what you call a debate fixation. Every year since 1996, I've done some kind of social science look at the effects of debates. This expertise helped Jameson notice something odd about the three debates between Trump and Clinton. As she told me, the conventional wisdom was that Hillary Clinton had done pretty well. According to CNN polls, conducted immediately after the debates, she won all three by a margin of 13% or greater. But during the period of the debates, Jameson and others at the Annenberg Center had overseen 3 telephone surveys, each sampling about 1,000 adults. In an election that turned more than most on judgments of character, Americans who saw or heard the second and third debates in particular were more likely than those who hadn't to agree that Clinton says one thing in public and something else in private. Jameson found this statistic curious, because by the time of the first debate on September 26th, Clinton's reputation for candor had already been tarnished by her failed attempt to hide the fact that she'd developed pneumonia, and by the revelation that at a recent fundraising event she'd described some Trump supporters as deplorables, a slur that contradicted her slogan Stronger Together. Other Annenberg Center polling data indicated to Jameson that concerns about Clinton being two-faced had been baked in voters' minds since before the first debate. Clinton had already been attacked for a very, very long time over that. Jameson recalls thinking, why would the debates have had an additional effect? After ensuring that the surveys had been properly conducted, Jameson analyzed whether this change in a voter's perception of Clinton's forthrightness predicted a change in his or her candidate's preference. To her surprise, she found that it did. As she put it to me, there was a small but significant drop in reported intention to vote for her. This statistic, too, struck Jameson as curious. She knew from years of scholarship that presidential debates bearing major gaffes typically increase the likelihood that you're casting a vote for, rather than against, a candidate. Last year, while Jameson was trying to determine what would have caused viewers' perception of Clinton's character to fall so consequentially, the Washington Post asked her to write an op-ed addressing whether Russian operatives had helped to elect Trump. Jameson agreed to do so, but she admitted to me I frankly hadn't thought about it one way or the other. Jameson is scrupulously nonpartisan in her work. Beth Mars, who helped lead Mitt Romney's presidential campaigns in 2008 and 12 and worked with Jameson on a bipartisan project about presidential debates, told me, "If Kathleen has a point of view, I don't know what it is. She's extraordinarily even-handed. She's fair and fearless." Anita Dunn, a Democratic advisor to Barack Obama, agrees. She too worked with Jameson on the presidential debates project, and she studied with her as an undergraduate. Jameson, she says, is constantly pointing out what the data actually shares, as opposed to those of us who just assert stuff. Jameson began her study of the 2016 election with an open mind, but in the fall of 2017, as she watched the House and the Senate held hearings on Russia's social media manipulations and reviewed the sampling of dozens of Facebook ads released by the House Intelligence Committee or paid for by Russians during the presidential campaign, she developed suspicions about the reasons behind Trump's victory. Before the hearings, Facebook's chairman and CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, had maintained that the amount of Russian content that had been disseminated on social media was too small to matter, but evidence presented to the Senate committee revealed that material generated by the Kremlin had reached 126 million American Facebook users, leading Senator Dianne Feinstein to call the cyber attack cataclysmic. House Democrats later released not only the ads, but also their targeting data, the demographics and the geographic locations of users receiving them, which indicated to Jameson whom the Russians were going for. Among other things, she could discern that the Russians had tried to minimize the vote of African Americans. Bogus Kremlin-sponsored ads that had circulated online, including one depicting a black woman in front of an African Americans for Hillary sign, had urged voters to tweet or text rather than vote, or to avoid the line and vote from home. Jameson's Post article was grounded in years of scholarship on political persuasion. She noted that political messages are especially effective when they are sent by trusted sources, such as members of one's own community. Russian operatives, it turned out, disguised themselves in precisely this way. As the Times first reported, on June 8, 2016, a Facebook user depicting himself as Melvin Reddick, a genial family man from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, posted a link to DCLeaks.com and wrote that users should check out the hidden truth about Hillary Clinton, George Soros, and other leaders of the United States. The profile photograph of Reddick showed him in a backward baseball cap alongside his young daughter, but Pennsylvania records showed no evidence of Reddick's existence, and the photograph matched an image of an unsuspecting man in Brazil, US. Intelligence experts later announced with high confidence that DC Leaks was the creation of the GRU, Russia's military intelligence agency.